His friend is my client. Would give his undying friendship to Mr. Walsh. Mr. Walsh would grant us a small favor.
Walsh, who's listening?
Give Johnny the part in that new war film you're starting next week.
He sits alone on the porch of his Virginia farmhouse, the morning sun rising through the mist, the world around him quiet and unbothered. Robert Duvall, now well into his 90s, has lived more lives than most men could ever imagine. Soldier, outlaw, preacher, consigliere, cowboy. His face has become a portrait of American storytelling. But beyond the screen, beyond the accolades and the Oscars, lies a man carved from defiance. A man who spent a lifetime refusing to kneel to Hollywood's false gods. Those who worked with him learned one rule quickly. You could love Robert Duvall, but you could never lie to him. Because if you did, you'd lose him forever. And somewhere along his road from Broadway stages to Hollywood royalty, one man crossed that line, and Duvall never forgave him. To understand Robert Duvall's hatred, you have to first understand the man. Born in 1931 in San Diego, raised under the stern gaze of a Navy admiral father, Duvall learned early that silence was stronger than shouting. He came from a world of discipline and order, but his spirit was restless. Acting became his rebellion, a way to break rules without breaking honor. After college, he moved to New York, living in tiny apartments, washing dishes, doing theater for pennies. He didn't care about fame, he cared about truth. The method acting revolution was erupting around him. Brando, Dean, Clift, and Duvall became part of that tribe. But unlike the others, he never let it consume him. He didn't live his roles. He attacked them. Every line, every gesture had to mean something. That intensity made him magnetic and dangerous. His first major appearance on film came in 1962, when he played Boo Radley in To Kill a Mockingbird. It was a silent role. No dialogue, just presence. But the stillness in his eyes said more than any line could. Critics called it haunting. For Duvall, it was validation. Hollywood had noticed, but he didn't chase the spotlight. He went back to the stage, to small parts, to the craft. He believed acting was sacred, and the industry, a necessary evil. His peers chased celebrity. Duvall chased perfection. And while others smiled for cameras, he carried a quiet disdain for the phoniness of it all. That disdain would eventually define him. By the late 1960s, Duvall was working steadily. True Grit, MASH, The Rain People. On that last film, he met a young director named Francis Ford Coppola. The two bonded quickly. Coppola admired Duvall's ferocity. Duvall admired Coppola's sincerity. They talked for hours about what movies could be. Real, grounded, truthful. It seemed like a partnership destined for greatness. But neither could know that their friendship would one day collapse into silence. Then came The Godfather. It was 1972, and Hollywood was changing. The studios didn't understand the film. They called it too dark, too slow. But Coppola fought for his vision, and Duvall was right there with him, playing Tom Hagen, the calm, calculating lawyer who wasn't born into the Corleone family, but understood it better than anyone. His performance was pure control, emotion buried beneath precision. The world saw it as restraint. Those who knew him saw it as authenticity. Duvall didn't act like Tom Hagen. He became him. On set, he formed bonds that felt unbreakable. James Caan, wild and loyal. Brando, the myth himself, who called Duvall one of the few actors he truly respected. And then there was Pacino, young, intense, mysterious. Duvall respected his craft but never his attitude. He once said Pacino was the kind of guy who makes acting look hard, which to Duvall was the worst insult possible. Acting should look effortless. The tension between them simmered beneath every scene. Two styles of performance locked in quiet battle. The success of The Godfather changed everything. Suddenly, everyone on that film became immortal. But with immortality came ego, and with ego came betrayal. When it came time to make The Godfather Part 2, the paychecks grew, but not equally. Pacino, by now the studio's golden boy, was given far more than Duvall. Still, Duvall returned. The work mattered more than the money. His performance in Part 2 was even deeper, a man caught between loyalty and logic, family and morality. Yet behind the scenes, the seeds of resentment were already sprouting. Years later, when The Godfather Part 3 was announced, Duvall expected fairness. He wanted equal pay with Pacino, not as ego, but as respect. Coppola, his old friend, offered him less. Duvall said no. It wasn't about greed, it was about principle. "If they paid Pacino twice what I got," he once said, "fine. But if they paid him 3 or 4 times, that's an insult." Coppola tried to persuade him, told him the film needed him, that Tom Hagen was the heart of the story. But Duvall refused. "It's not the money," he told reporters later. "It's the fairness. You don't disrespect a man who's been there from the beginning." The world would see The Godfather Part 3 without him, and many agreed it was never the same. To this day, Duvall never spoke to Coppola again. But that wasn't his only war. In the 1980s, Duvall took on a new challenge, a small, quiet film called Tender Mercies. He played a washed-up country singer trying to find redemption in Texas. It was the role of a lifetime, one that mirrored his own spirit, tough, stubborn, aching for truth. The director, Bruce Beresford, was an Australian filmmaker known for his sensitivity. At first, their collaboration was electric. Duvall respected his vision. Beresford respected Duvall's process. But as filming went on, cracks appeared. Duvall hated excessive direction. He believed once an actor found the truth of a scene, a director should step back. Beresford, meanwhile, wanted precision, multiple takes, subtle variations. Their arguments became legendary. Crew members recalled shouting matches, Duvall storming off set, Beresford fuming in silence. When the film was finally edited, Duvall claimed Beresford had cut moments that gave the character depth. He lied in the edit, Duvall allegedly told a friend. Beresford, in return, called Duvall difficult, but brilliant. The world saw the finished product and praised it. Duvall won the Academy Award for Best Actor, his first and only Oscar. But when his name was called, there was no smile, no gratitude, only a tight, unreadable expression. He thanked almost everyone, except Bruce Beresford. In interviews afterward, he never mentioned the director's name. To Duvall, Tender Mercies belonged to him alone. "That was my work," he said once. "No one else's." It was triumph wrapped in bitterness, victory shadowed by resentment. The 1990s saw Duvall entering a new phase. He began writing, producing, even directing. Films like The Apostle showed his mastery of storytelling, raw, intimate, spiritual. He built his own production company so he'd never again have to bow to Hollywood politics. But his disdain for the industry only deepened. He mocked actors who chased publicity, directors who sold out for money. He called Marlon Brando lazy in his later years and dismissed Pacino's style as too theatrical. It wasn't cruelty, it was honesty. He believed art should be real, and if you broke that rule, he had no use for you. His interviews became unpredictable, sometimes warm and reflective, other times cutting and ruthless. When asked about his old friends, he'd pause, then deflect with a smirk. "Some guys in this business," he'd say, "they talk too much and feel too little." Every word carried a history of grudges, some spoken, some buried. Those who knew him said Duvall wasn't capable of half measures. You were either in his circle or you were gone. And once you were gone, there was no coming back. Behind his gruffness, though, there was principle. Duvall hated hypocrisy. He hated dishonesty. He hated people who talked about art but didn't live it. Hollywood was full of them. That's why his feud with Coppola hurt the most, because, in the beginning, Coppola wasn't one of them. He had been pure, passionate, rebellious, sincere, but the man who fought for The Godfather became the man who disappointed him. For Duvall, that was unforgivable. Over the years, journalists tried to resurrect their friendship. Coppola, when asked, called Duvall a genius, saying he regretted not paying him more. Duvall's response was silence, not anger, not forgiveness, just nothing. Silence for Duvall was louder than rage. He would rather erase you than insult you. It was his form of vengeance, cold, clean, final. When asked directly about Coppola in one interview, Duvall simply said, "That's the past. I don't go there." But his eyes, still sharp and unflinching, told a different story. Some wounds never close. In those later years, Duvall surrounded himself with simpler things: his wife Luciana, his horses, the quiet rhythm of rural life. He stayed busy, making films like Open Range and Get Low, stories about men with regrets, but no apologies. Every role seemed to echo his philosophy: pride over compromise, truth over comfort. Even when he smiled, there was steel behind it. He was the last of a dying breed, an actor from a time when men didn't need to explain themselves. His legacy isn't just his performances, it's his defiance. In an industry that feeds on conformity, Duvall never played along. He refused to attend fake parties, refused to flatter producers, refused to accept roles that didn't speak to him. "I do what's right for me," he once said, "and if they don't like it, to hell with them." He burned bridges without hesitation, but somehow always found new ones to cross. The respect he earned wasn't from obedience, it was from fear and admiration intertwined. The truth is, Duvall's hatred was never random. He didn't hate out of jealousy or insecurity. He hated betrayal. He hated being lied to. And when Francis Ford Coppola failed to keep his word, when he turned friendship into business, Duvall saw that as the ultimate sin. Their relationship began as mutual respect between artist and actor. It ended in Cold War silence. For decades, they never reconciled. Coppola continued making films. Duvall continued rejecting them. Somewhere between those years, two men who changed cinema stopped being brothers. When asked about The Godfather Part 3 years later, Duvall shrugged. "They didn't need me," he said, "and I didn't need them." But everyone who heard it knew that wasn't the whole truth. He needed respect. Not money, not fame. Just respect. And when that disappeared, so did his loyalty. In a way, that's what made him so rare. In an industry built on compromise, he never once compromised himself. He outlasted almost all his peers. Brando, Caan, Hopper, even Pacino fading from public view. Duvall remained. Sharp, grounded, unbroken. His performances continued to carry that same weight. A stillness, a refusal to fake emotion. Because for him, acting was never about pretending. It was about revealing. He often said the best acting came from the truth of a man's heart. That's why his characters, whether cowboys or killers, always seemed alive, even when silent. They were extensions of himself, proud, flawed, unyielding. As he grew older, interviews became rarer. But when they did happen, they were pure Duvall, direct, uncompromising, strangely tender beneath the gruff exterior. In one of his last long interviews, when asked what he valued most, he paused for nearly a full minute. Then he said, "Decency. The truth. You lose that, you lose everything." It was a quiet admission, the kind that reveals more than it intends. Because perhaps Duvall's greatest pain wasn't hatred at all. It was disappointment. He had believed in men like Coppola, believed in the brotherhood of the craft. But when the promises broke, he didn't rage. He retreated. And in that retreat, his silence became legend. Hollywood still whispers about it. The man who wouldn't sell out. The actor who turned down Godfather 3 over principle. The cowboy who stood alone against the system. Some call it arrogance. Others call it purity. But either way, it defined him. Today, when film historians talk about Robert Duvall, they mention his roles, his awards, his mastery. But those who worked with him remember something deeper. His code. They remember the man who could walk into a room, say almost nothing, and still command it. The man who didn't need approval. The man who, once crossed, never looked back. As the sun sets over his ranch, Duvall sits quietly, the wind carrying the faint sound of horses in the distance. His face is older now, softer in some ways, but the eyes, those sharp, unflinching eyes, are the same. Behind them, the history of 1,000 moments, 1,000 choices. He never became the richest, never became the flashiest, but he became something rarer, incorruptible. He never reconciled with Francis Ford Coppola, never called, never wrote. Perhaps he didn't need to. Their story was already written, in film reels and silence. Two men who built something immortal together, then walked away from it. In the end, Duvall didn't hate for the sake of hate. He hated because he cared, because he believed in something real, and when that realness was violated, there was nothing left to say. So when people ask, who did Robert Duvall truly hate more than anyone? The answer isn't simple. It wasn't Pacino, or Brando, or even Bruce Beresford. It was the man he once trusted most. The man who made him family on screen and a stranger off it. Francis Ford Coppola, the brother he lost not to death, but to disappointment. And maybe that's what defines Duvall's story. Not hatred, but hurt disguised as pride. Because beneath the iron will, there's a man who gave everything to his art, and expected the same in return. As the last light fades and the world grows quiet, Duvall leans back, watching the horizon. The wars are over now. The grudges belong to the past, but the fire in his eyes remains. The fire of a man who never faked it, who lived and died by truth. And in that silence, you can still hear the echo of his creed: never lie, never kneel, and never forgive those who do. Because for Robert Duvall, hatred was never just emotion. It was a boundary, a way of saying, this far, no further. And that is why, in a world built on pretense, Robert Duvall remains what Hollywood fears most. A man who couldn't be bought, couldn't be tamed, and above all, couldn't be lied to. Years after the cameras stopped rolling and the crowds forgot the premieres, Duvall's legend took on a quieter shape. The man who once stormed through sets now moved through his ranch like a ghost from another century. Reporters called him Hollywood's last cowboy, but he didn't see himself that way. To him, the land was honest in a way people weren't. Horses never lied. Weather never pretended. Out there, among the fences and dust, he found what Los Angeles never gave him, peace that didn't need applause. Sometimes younger actors would visit him, hoping to absorb wisdom from the old master. They expected lectures about technique, about camera angles and delivery. What they got instead were stories about life. He'd talk about watching Brando forget lines, about Pacino's endless rehearsals, about Coppola's wild genius before the money changed everything. Then he'd pause, squint toward the fields and say, "None of that matters if you don't mean it." They'd nod politely, not always understanding that for Duvall, truth was oxygen. Without it, a performance suffocated. He was known to drive alone at night, windows down, country radio low. Locals said he'd stop by small diners and talk with strangers, asking about their families, their work. He believed every person carried a story more interesting than most movies. It was his way of staying grounded, of remembering that fame was an illusion built on other people's loneliness. In those moments, you could glimpse the man beneath the legend. Stubborn, yes, but tender in ways he'd never admit. When the Academy honored him late in life, inviting him to stand among the new generation, he declined more than once. "I already said thank you," he told a friend. He wasn't ungrateful. He just believed respect had an expiration date. You earned it every day or it disappeared. Hollywood, to him, had stopped earning it long ago. The same studios that once begged him for gravitas were now chasing algorithms and franchises. He would shake his head, half amused, half disgusted. "They don't make characters anymore," he'd mutter. "They make merchandise." Yet, for all his distance, there was still warmth in him, a humor that flickered when he spoke of Luciana, his wife and closest ally. She'd tease him for his temper, call him grumpy cowboy, and he'd grin like a schoolboy. She was the one person who could tell him when he was wrong, and he'd listen. When asked once what kept their marriage strong, he said, "She's honest." That's all I ever wanted, honesty. The same trait that cost him friends, now the only thing that kept him human. As the years rolled on, retrospectives of his work began to appear. Critics rediscovered The Apostle, praising it as one of the most spiritual films ever made by an American actor. Duvall never bragged about it. He'd simply say, "That was mine. I made it the way I wanted." That sentence summed up his life, doing it his way, even when it hurt. Because in a world of compromise, he'd rather fail honestly than succeed pretending. Sometimes, late in the evening, he'd rewatch old westerns, Cooper, Stewart, Wayne. He admired their simplicity, their codes. He'd once said that the cowboy wasn't just a character, he was an idea. A man alone, guided only by conscience. Maybe that's why Duvall kept gravitating toward that image. It wasn't nostalgia, it was prophecy. He had become the very thing he played, a man riding against the wind, unwilling to surrender. If Francis Ford Coppola ever watches The Horizon 2, perhaps he feels the same melancholy, the weight of years and words unsaid. Two men who built an empire of cinema, separated not by hatred anymore, but by time. Maybe Duvall's silence wasn't punishment. Maybe it was peace. Because after all the shouting, after all the deals and betrayals, silence was the only language left that couldn't be faked. And so the story ends where it began, with Robert Duvall sitting on his porch, hat pulled low, eyes fixed on the fading light. The world remembers his anger, his defiance, his feuds. But the truth is simpler. He wasn't a man who hated easily. He was a man who believed too deeply. And in a city built on illusion, belief can be the loneliest curse of all.